Now that your husband's dead, we can sell this place." He said it without hesitation, as if he were talking about an old sofa, not the home I'd lived in for 51 years. As if the word dead didn't still hang in the hallway like his favorite winter coat. My son, Garrison, stood in my kitchen with a coffee he didn't bother offering to make for me, pointing at the walls, the ceiling, the garden. "It's too big for you, Mom. What are you going to do here all alone?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was still holding the teacup I'd poured 20 minutes ago, now cold. My fingers had gone numb around the porcelain. He looked around with that managerial squint of his, real estate agent eyes, already dissecting my life into square footage and resale potential. 3 bedrooms, corner lot, great school district. We could get a good price. I know a guy who could do minor repairs, fix the porch railing, and if we stage it properly. I finally found my voice. "Stage it?" "For buyers," he said, sipping his coffee. "We'd rent a few pieces, clean up all the old photos and stuff. People want to imagine their life here, not yours." Not yours. He meant the quilts I'd sewn by hand, the cross above the kitchen door, the row of mugs we collected over 40 years of road trips. He meant the swing Derek hung for the grandkids, the one no one used anymore. He meant the creaking steps he never helped fix and the lilac bush I planted when his sister was born. He meant everything that was mine. "I'm not ready," I said finally. He frowned like I'd dropped a plate. "Ready? Mom, this is just practical. You don't need all this space. You'll be safer in a condo. Closer to the city, elevator access. You could even—" I said I'm not ready. He paused then. Just a beat. But not because he understood. It was the pause of someone recalculating a negotiation strategy. "Okay," he said, backing off with a smile that never touched his eyes. "We'll talk later. No pressure." He left 10 minutes later, forgetting his coffee cup, as always. I stood by the window, watching his expensive SUV reverse out of the driveway like it had somewhere more important to be. The silence that settled after the engine faded was not peaceful. It was surgical, a kind of hollowing that began in the chest and spread outward. This house didn't always creak like this. The porch used to feel strong under Derek's boots. The floorboards knew the rhythm of our mornings, kettle, chairs scraping, the thud of the newspaper. I used to set 3 places at breakfast even after Lila moved out. Now, there's just one. And still, he wants to take even that. I walked through the house that night like someone circling a crime scene. My hand grazed the wood paneling in the hallway, worn smooth where Derek's shoulder always brushed past. The photo on the mantel of us in Myrtle Beach, sunburned and smiling. The dent in the armrest from his wedding ring, where he used to tap during the evening news. I sat in his chair. It groaned a little, but held me. Garrison had always been decisive, efficient. That's what they said at his office. A real go-getter. But I remember the boy who couldn't sleep without a nightlight, who cried when his goldfish died and made me hold a funeral in the garden. He didn't ask how I was coping. Didn't ask how the nights were since the funeral. Didn't ask if I ate, or if the grocery trips tired me out. He came with a plan. Not for me, for the house. For the money. I sat there until the sun went down, listening to the ticking of the old clock Derek fixed 3 times over the years. It was a sound Garrison never liked. "Too loud," he'd say. "Get a digital one." He didn't get it. The tick wasn't a flaw. It was proof of movement, of survival. I ran my fingers along the upholstery, the fraying threads. Then I reached for Derek's photo. "I'm not ready," I whispered again. But in truth, something had shifted. Not toward surrender, toward clarity. He thought I was fragile now, defeated, alone. He didn't know me at all. The next morning, I opened the cupboard above the sink and just stood there. Half a box of oats, a nearly empty jar of marmalade, tea bags, the cheap kind, the ones I always saved for company I didn't particularly like. I wasn't hungry. Hadn't been since the funeral, truth be told. Derek used to say I made the best scrambled eggs in the county, and I'd roll my eyes, but I always made them anyway. For him. For the smile he gave me on the first bite. Now I boiled water, poured it over a tea bag, and sat in silence while it went cold. I left the cupboard open and walked to the dining room. The chairs looked too stiff, like they were bracing for something. The long table still had the lace runner I'd ironed 2 weeks before Derek got sick. I kept meaning to take it off. I kept meaning to do a lot of things. In the center of the table was the wooden bowl Derek made in a woodworking class when he turned 65. It was supposed to hold fruit. Now it held keys, rubber bands, and a few pennies too tarnished to spend. I reached in, took out a button I didn't recognize, and put it in my pocket. No reason why. It just felt like something to do. There's something hollow about a house that's waiting to be taken from you. Every floorboard becomes a whisper. Every room starts to shrink. Not because it's smaller, but because someone else is measuring it with tape and talk of modern updates. Garrison's words echoed in my head all morning. You'll be safer in a condo. As if safety was what I needed. As if my grief would be somehow cushioned by elevators and recycled air. I walked into the laundry room where the old wicker basket still sat by the dryer. I hadn't touched Derek's last shirt, still folded over the edge like he'd just taken it off. It smelled faintly of cedar and the cologne he wore only on Sundays. I pressed it to my face, and my knees buckled just a little. Later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, this time with the utility bills spread in front of me. The handwriting on the check stubs was mine, but the numbers next to Garrison's name weren't small. Last Christmas, he needed help with a temporary cash flow issue. I sent $5,000. The year before that, I helped them cover Rebecca's braces. And wasn't it me who paid for the first down payment on their house when he and Teresa got married? The list went on, and yet he stood in this same kitchen, looked around, and said, "We can sell this place." We. Like he was part owner of my memories, like he had a say in where I belonged. I opened the bottom drawer of the hutch, the one that still stuck on the left side. Inside were old receipts, warranty papers, and a folder marked House. I pulled it out and flipped through the documents. The deed was still in my name. Margaret Elwood, sole owner. I sat back. It shouldn't have surprised me. Derek and I bought this house when Garrison was 6, paid it off over 30 years with sweat and coupons and 1,000 quiet sacrifices. No refinancing, no second mortgage. Every scratch in the floor had a story. Every corner had a ghost of someone we loved. It wasn't just a house. It was a life. And suddenly, I realized I didn't want to spend my final years explaining that to anyone, especially not to my son, who saw it as an asset. The kettle began to whistle, loud and shrill, snapping me out of the paperwork. I turned it off and stood there, watching the steam rise. Somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the ache and the tiredness, a small, stubborn thing stirred. It wasn't anger, not quite. Not yet. It was something older than that. Something like resolve. I walked back to the open cupboard, took out the oats, measured a portion, heated the milk just right. added cinnamon the way Derek liked. I sat down and ate every bite, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to remember what it felt like to care for someone, even if, just for today, that someone was me. The card came 2 days late. I found it in the mailbox tucked between an electric bill and a catalog I hadn't subscribed to in years. A small white envelope with my name, Mom, scribbled in Garrison's hurried print. No return address. No stamp either. He must have dropped it in himself. Inside was a store-bought card, one of those generic ones with a watercolor vase and "Thinking of you on your special day," printed in script. No note. Just his name at the bottom, Garrison. As if I were a stranger who needed reminding. I turned 76 last Thursday. No visit, no call. Just a card. Dropped off like an obligation. He used to make me cards. When he was small, he'd sneak construction paper out of the drawer and sit on the kitchen floor, tongue sticking out as he traced crooked hearts in red marker. "To the best mommy in the world," he'd write. I kept those cards in a shoebox, wrapped in ribbon, upstairs in my closet. I hadn't looked at them in years. Maybe I should. After Derek passed, birthdays stopped feeling like milestones. But even still, a call would have been something. A voice. A question. "How are you, Mom? Are you okay today?" But no, just that impersonal card. That evening, Teresa posted photos from their family dinner on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, but Ruth is. She showed me the pictures on her tablet the next morning while we drank coffee on her porch. "There's Garrison," she said, tapping the screen. "At that new Italian place. Looks fancy." The photo showed a candle-lit table. Garrison smiling, raising a glass of wine. Teresa across from him in a red dress. Rebecca next to her, half smiling, scrolling her phone. No sign that it was my birthday. No mention. "It must have been for something else," I said, trying to sound casual. "A work thing, maybe?" Ruth didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and put the tablet down. But I could feel her pity like a weight on the table between us. I walked home in silence. The leaves on the sidewalk were crisp under my shoes, and the sun was already dipping behind the elms by the time I reached my porch. That chill in the air, late October, just before the real cold sets in. The kind of air that tells you the year's almost done. I sat on the steps for a while, watching nothing. A car drove by, not Garrison's. I thought about calling him, just to ask why, just to say, "You forgot me." But then what? He'd apologize, maybe. Blame work, stress, some vague excuse about time getting away from him. He'd say I was overthinking it. That's what he always said when I brought up the things he chose to ignore. Instead, I went inside and boiled water for tea. My own small ritual. And while it steeped, I pulled down the shoebox. The lid was dusty. I hadn't touched it since before Derek's diagnosis. I sat on the rug in the living room, the same place Garrison used to build Lego castles and fall asleep with his head in my lap. Inside the box, the cards were still bright. Faded at the edges, but the love was loud. One in particular caught my eye. Yellow construction paper, with a stick figure boy holding a bouquet. "To Mommy," it said. "You are the bestest mom because you make pancakes and don't yell when I spill." On the back, "P.S. I love you bigger than the sky." I sat with that for a long time. That little boy had once loved me bigger than the sky. When did it change? When did I stop being a mother and start being a resource? A walking checkbook, a piece of property, a house to be sold, a name on a card sent late. I put the box away carefully, slid it back into the closet, and stood there for a moment, staring at the old coats and worn shoes. Then I closed the door. There was something building inside me. Something slow but strong. Not sadness. Not anymore. Sadness had sat with me too long. This was something else. Something with edges. Not rage. I didn't have the energy for rage, but a quiet knowing. A shift. And once a shift like that begins, it doesn't stop. It started with a light bulb, the one above the back porch, flickering for weeks. Derek always changed it. He had a whole system: ladder from the shed, gloves from the drawer, new bulb from the tin box in the hall closet. "It's not just a light," he used to say. "It's safety. People fall in the dark." I hadn't bothered with it since he passed. I told myself it wasn't urgent. But the truth was simpler. I just didn't want to climb a ladder and remember what it used to feel like to hand him the tools, to watch him hum while he worked. But this morning, I did it. The bulb was too tight. I had to press harder than I should have. When it gave, the jolt sent my elbow into the frame of the door. It wasn't sharp pain, not really. Just that slow, deep ache that blooms under the skin like something blooming in the dark. By afternoon, the bruise was a pale smudge on my arm. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot Garrison had stood, while suggesting we free up the equity, and I stared at it, at my own skin, thinning with age, blooming with proof that I could still be hurt. Then I opened the drawer beneath the phone. The one labeled important. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, neatly labeled: phone bill, taxes, insurance, and tucked behind them, the notebook. Blue cover, cracked spine, my handwriting across the front. Personal ledger. I hadn't opened it in years, not since before Derek's last hospital stay, not since life had blurred into doctor visits and frozen casseroles and forms I signed without reading. But today, I opened it. Page after page, dates and numbers, payments, transfers, notes. 2017, $12,000, Garrison's business loan. Just a short-term thing, Mom, interest-free. 2018, $4,500, Teresa's surgery deductible. 2019, $9,200, Rebecca's semester abroad. 2020, $3,000, roof leak on their house. We'll pay you back next month, promise. There was no next month. I flipped through faster. Each page was like a bruise. $800. Their anniversary trip deposit, $2,500. Down payment on Garrison's new car. $600. Teresa's continuing education course she never finished. Line after line, I saw it for what it was. Not generosity, not support. Extraction. Every time they called, it was a crisis. Every time I gave, it was temporary. But the calls never stopped. The crises never ended. And I never said no. Derek used to tell me, "They'll take as long as you give. That's not cruelty. That's human nature." I didn't want to believe it. I thought I was showing love. I thought I was helping. But love doesn't look like silence on your birthday. It doesn't look like plans to sell your home before the funeral flowers have faded. I stood, walked to the hall, and pulled down the box labeled taxes. Inside were bank statements. Not digital. I never trusted that. I liked paper. I liked the sound of a page when you turn it, the weight of truth in your hands. I sat for hours, highlighter in hand, yellow for gifts, pink for loans, blue for expenses they promised to repay. The page filled quickly. By evening, I had a tally. $73,480. That's what I'd given them in the last 10 years. I leaned back, pressing the cool end of the highlighter to my lips. It wasn't just the money. It was the way it had slowly erased me. One favor at a time. One kindness that became expectation. They never asked how I managed. Never noticed that I stopped going to the hairdresser, stopped buying new shoes, stopped replacing the chipped plates. They didn't know because they didn't ask, and I didn't tell. I closed the ledger and placed it gently back in the drawer. Then I picked up the phone. Not to call Garrison. Not yet. I called the bank. It was time to change a few things. The woman on the other end of the phone had a cheerful voice, too cheerful for what I was about to ask. "Mrs. Elwood, how can I help you today?" "I'd like a copy of my home's mortgage file," I said. "Everything, from the first payment to the last." There was a brief pause, then the sound of typing. "Of course. One moment, please. Yes, I see it here. Looks like the mortgage was paid in full back in," she paused again, "2012. No liens, no outstanding balances." I already knew, but hearing it said aloud did something. 12 years. Derek and I had burned the last check together, standing out in the backyard like a couple of kids playing pretend. He had danced, can you believe it? A little two-step on the patio in his socks. "We own this place," he'd said, laughing. "Every creaky floorboard, every crack in the ceiling, all ours." And now Garrison thought it was his, as if I'd been holding the title in trust for him, as if my decades of budgeting and sacrifice and skipped vacations had been part of his inheritance plan. "Can you mail me the full history?" I asked. "Absolutely. Should arrive within 5 to 7 business days." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. The kitchen was still. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the whisper of leaves brushing the window. I looked around, not at the appliances, not at the cabinets, but at the space itself. The way morning light slanted across the floor. The faint ring where Derek always set his mug. The chip in the tile from when I dropped a pie plate the Thanksgiving his mother came to stay. This wasn't just a structure. It was a vessel. And it was mine. I walked out to the front porch, the one Garrison had called outdated and dangerous looking. He said no one wanted steps like that anymore. "It's all about sleek entries and minimal landscaping," he'd told me. "We'll hire someone to tear out the bushes." Tear out the bushes. The ones Derek trimmed every spring, even after his hands started shaking. The ones I planted in '86 with a neighbor's help when we couldn't afford a landscaper. They bloom every April, like clockwork. First thing you see when you come up the walk. I ran my hand over the porch rail. A little splintered, sure, but solid. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. I pulled out the chair cushion from the storage box and sat in Derek's rocker. The cushions sagged in all the familiar places. I pulled my sweater close and stared at the driveway. Empty. I didn't want Garrison to show up, but part of me wondered. Would he? Had he sensed the shift in our last conversation? Did he understand what he'd started? Or was he still sitting in his city office, drawing up plans for my future without asking if I had one of my own? My eyes wandered to the small garden bed by the porch. I'd let it go this year. No tulips. No marigolds. I couldn't bring myself to dig in the dirt without Derek's voice behind me, reminding me to go easy on that back. But now I wanted to dig. I wanted to plant something, to reclaim the soil as mine. I stood, went to the shed, pulled out the rusted trowel and gloves. Knees didn't like it. They protested as I knelt. But I got down anyway. I turned over the dry soil, broke it up with slow, careful hands, pulled out old roots, felt the ache move through my shoulders and spine like a conversation I hadn't had in years. The sun began to dip. By the time I stood up, my hands were sore, my knees stiff, but there was a clean patch of earth in front of me. Ready. Something small and blooming would go there. Something new. Not because I was starting over, but because I was staying. And if Garrison wanted to talk value, well, I had my own measure. And it didn't start with square footage. They came on a Sunday, unannounced, of course. Teresa led the way, like always, holding her purse like it carried more than receipts and lip balm, like it held authority. Garrison followed, phone in hand, tapping away as they stepped inside. "We were in the neighborhood," Teresa said, air-kissing my cheek. It was a lie. They lived 45 minutes away. But she said it like she was doing me a favor, like her presence was a gift I hadn't earned, but somehow still received. I hadn't made coffee. I hadn't baked anything. That used to bother me, not having something to offer. Today, I simply said, "You can sit in the dining room. It's warmest in there." Teresa walked ahead, surveying the house like a realtor. "You still haven't replaced those curtains?" she asked, settling into the same chair she always chose, the one with the best view of the backyard. "I saw a sale at Modern Nest. They've got lovely sheer panels that would really open the space." "It's not a stage," I said, pulling out the chair across from her. "It's my home." She gave a tight smile. "Of course. Just trying to help." Garrison finally looked up from his phone. "Did you think about what we talked about last time?" I looked at him, really looked, for the first time that afternoon. Same face I used to wipe with a warm cloth. Same eyes that used to crinkle when he was proud of a drawing or a math test. But now they held something else. Calculation. "I did," I said. "And?" "I thought no." Teresa stiffened. "No to which part?" "To all of it," I said calmly. "The sale, the move, the idea that I need managing." Teresa opened her mouth, but Garrison held up a hand. "Mom, this isn't about managing. It's about being realistic. You're not getting younger, and this house is, let's be honest, too much for one person." I leaned back. "Too much for me? Or too far out of reach for you?" He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I know how to read a bank statement. I know how much I've given, and how much hasn't come back. And now you've got your eye on something else. The biggest thing left." Teresa scoffed. "No one's trying to take anything, Margaret." "Then why are we talking about selling what isn't yours to sell?" The room went quiet. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual. Teresa stood. "This isn't productive." "No," I said. "It's not polite either. But neither is telling a woman to downsize before her husband's ashes have settled." Garrison stood too, slowly, more uncertain. "We're just trying to help." "If you wanted to help," I said, standing with them, "you'd have come on my birthday. You'd have fixed the porch railing. You'd have asked how I'm sleeping at night." I looked at both of them, really looked. The picture-perfect couple. Always curated. Always polished. But something was cracked in their faces now. Something unsure. Teresa reached for her bag. "Well, we tried." "Yes," I said. "You did. And now you can try the door." She didn't say goodbye. Garrison hesitated for a moment like he might, but then he followed her out. I stood at the window after they left, watched their car back out of the driveway. The wheels kicked up a few dry leaves. Teresa didn't look back. Garrison did. Once. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I just stood there, feeling the weight shift again. There was no rage, no dramatic storm, just a clarity that settled like dust. Soft, final, familiar. I wasn't angry that they wanted the house. I was angry that they thought I wouldn't notice. The phone rang just after 9. I was already in bed, propped up on Derek's old pillows, reading a cookbook I didn't plan to use. Some nights, I just liked the structure of recipes. Clear instructions, definite outcomes, no confusion. The screen lit up. Rebecca. My thumb hovered over the button a second longer than usual. She didn't call often, not unless she needed something. But I answered. Grandma? Her voice was small, hesitant. I imagined her sitting in her car, maybe, or whispering from the hallway so Teresa wouldn't hear. I'm here, I said. There was a pause. Then, I heard what happened. I didn't ask how. That family couldn't keep quiet if their lives depended on it. I'm sorry, she said. And this time, I heard the real thing. No polish. No preamble. Why are you sorry? I asked softly. You didn't say anything cruel. You didn't try to sell my walls out from under me. Rebecca sighed. They were talking about it again tonight, like it was a foregone conclusion. Dad said you're holding on out of stubbornness. Mom said you'll get used to the condo once it's decorated right. I shut the book. They think they're being helpful, I said, even though I didn't believe it. They think practicality excuses erasure. Another pause. I told them they were wrong, she said, that this house is yours, that it's the only place that's ever felt like home. The weight in my chest shifted. She wasn't like the rest of them. She still remembered the summers on this porch, the lemonade I made too tart, the way Derek used to lift her onto his shoulders just to touch the wind chimes. I miss it there, she said, more quietly now. I miss you. I didn't reply right away. My eyes burned. You can come any time, I said. You don't need their permission. Rebecca exhaled, almost a laugh, but softer. Thank you. We talked for a while after that, about school, her job, a boy she liked but hadn't told her parents about yet. It was the kind of call I hadn't had in years. No asks, no conditions. Just talk. Real. Warm. Before she hung up, she said something I wasn't prepared for. Grandma, don't let them wear you down. You're stronger than all of them combined. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat was too tight. But after the call ended, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my hands clasped over the book. She still saw me. She remembered. That night, I didn't reach for sleeping pills. I didn't need them. Rebecca had reminded me of something I'd been starting to forget. That I wasn't just someone's leftover responsibility. I was a person, a woman, a grandmother, and I still mattered. In the quiet, I whispered it aloud, just to hear it spoken. I still matter. The walls heard me, and I think they agreed. Ruth showed up the next morning with scones and a look that said she already knew more than she should. I brought the cranberry ones, she announced, breezing in like she always did, bypassing the formality of a knock. And I swear, if you try to feed me that bitter tea you keep around for company, I'll dump it straight in your fern. I smiled in spite of myself. You always were bossy. She set the scones on the kitchen table and pulled out 2 mugs. I'm consistent. That's different. I made the good tea, the one I kept tucked behind the spices, reserved for days when I wanted to remember that I once had a taste for small luxuries. We sat in silence for a while, sipping, chewing. The morning light spilled through the window in that soft way it does when the air still smells like dew. Outside, a squirrel chased a leaf across the porch rail. Then Ruth set her mug down and said, I heard about Garrison. Of course she had. Her nephew worked at the bank. Small towns are always efficient when it comes to gossip, especially the kind with dollar signs. I didn't tell him anything, she added quickly. But word gets around. I nodded. It's fine. I haven't exactly been subtle. Ruth leaned forward. What did he say, exactly? About the house? I told her. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just the facts, laid out one after the other like old receipts. The birthday he forgot, the mortgage I paid alone, the late-night call with Rebecca. The moment he stood in my kitchen and used the word "we like," it belonged there. Ruth didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way real friends do, the kind who know when silence is better than solutions. When I was done, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. You know what I think? No, I said, but I imagine you'll tell me. She smiled. You've been more than generous. Too generous. And now they've mistaken your kindness for consent. That stopped me. Kindness for consent. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but she was right. Every time I nodded, every time I paid, every time I bit my tongue, I was saying yes, even when I meant no. Ruth took a bite of her scone and chewed slowly. My sister's kids tried that with her, tried to convince her she couldn't manage, that it was time to think smart about her future. You know what she did? What? She packed their bags and changed the locks, said if they wanted to live in a house so badly they could go find their own. I laughed. I don't have it in me to be that dramatic. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to remember who you are. Before Garrison, before they started treating you like a walking checkbook. I looked at her, really looked. Ruth, with her sharp tongue, her bird-like bones, her impeccable memory. She'd outlived 2 husbands, buried a child, and still managed to laugh like someone who'd never known a bad day. I don't know who I am anymore, I admitted quietly. Yes, you do, she said. You're just used to whispering her down. We finished our tea in that easy silence that comes with history. When she stood to leave, she kissed the top of my head. Don't let them take it, Margaret. Not the house. Not your voice. After she left, I washed the mugs and stood at the sink for a long time, letting the water run over my hands. The drain gurgled softly, the way it always had. And I thought, maybe for the first time in weeks, that I didn't feel quite so alone. The next Tuesday, I put on my gray coat, the one with the velvet collar Derek used to say made me look damn dignified, and walked to the bus stop with a folder in my handbag and a quiet certainty in my chest. Baxter and Cole had been handling our affairs for decades. They helped us buy the house in '73, set up Derek's modest will in '91, and filed the paperwork when we paid off the mortgage. Back then, the office was in a little brick building near the library. Now it sat in one of those glass and steel towers that made the rest of town look like it needed ironing. I stepped into the elevator, floor 6, and told the receptionist my name. She smiled, clicked a few keys, and said, "Mr. Kaufman will be with you shortly." He was new, young, hair too neat, tie too bold. I'd expected that. Still, when he came out with his hand extended, calling me Mrs. Elwood, I straightened a little. He led me into his office, all gray tones and light wood, and closed the door. "What can I help you with today?" he asked, opening a notebook. I handed him the folder. Inside were the bank statements, the deed, the list of transfers I'd written by hand, color-coded. He flipped through it, his brow tightening. "This is very thorough," he said. "I kept receipts," I replied, "and memory. Both work better than you'd think at 76. He smiled, but not condescendingly. Good sign. "I want to revise my will," I said, "and I want to set up a trust." "Of course," he said, pulling out a form. Do you have an idea of what changes you'd like to make? I nodded. Garrison was out. Fully. No residue, no contingency. No, if he apologizes someday and brings me soup. I was done gambling on the idea that proximity meant love. The house, and everything not already spent or needed, would go to Rebecca. She's the only one who calls to ask how I am, I said. The only one who doesn't see me as a ledger. He nodded, scribbling notes. And I want it protected, I added. If anything happens to me, the house can't be sold by anyone but her, not even under pressure. That's what a trust can do, he confirmed. We can set it up so she inherits it directly, but it remains separate from any marital or family claim. That way, if she's ever pressured or manipulated, she won't be, I said firmly. But I want her to know I planned for that anyway. He worked quickly, but explained everything as he went. It didn't feel rushed. It felt clean, like a room that had just been dusted and opened to sunlight. When it was done, he handed me a copy of the draft. I'll file the papers and have the originals for you by the end of the week, he said. Anything else I can help you with? I paused. Yes, I said. I'd like to write a letter to accompany the will. He tilted his head. A personal one? Yes, for Rebecca. To be opened only if... I hesitated. Well, when? He nodded, pulled out a cream-colored envelope and set it on the desk. I didn't write it there. I took it home. That kind of letter needed my own kitchen table, my own light, my own hand. But as I walked out of the office, past the glossy reception desk and back into the cool air of the city, I felt something I hadn't in months. Agency. No one knew yet, but something fundamental had shifted. Not in them. In me. I hadn't climbed into the attic since Derek passed. Too many stairs, too many memories, too much dust. But after the lawyer's visit, after I signed the papers and began the quiet process of reclaiming what was mine, I felt a pull. A strange, weightless kind of instinct that said, go up there. The ladder was stiff, the kind that groaned like it resented being disturbed. I tugged it down and took my time. One step at a time, one breath per rung. At the top, the air was musty, like cardboard and forgotten summers. The little bulb still worked. Its weak glow painted everything in gold and shadow. I stood for a while, letting my eyes adjust. It was all still here. Derek's fishing gear. Old Christmas decorations, boxes labeled in his blocky handwriting. Lila, school. Photos 1980, 1992, Misk, don't throw. And there it was, against the back wall. The wooden trunk. Derek's grandfather had made it, long before either of us were born. Derek kept his keepsakes in it. Letters, notebooks. The odd coin or matchbook he insisted had meaning. He hadn't opened it much in his final years. Said some things were better left to memory. But I wasn't looking for memory. I was looking for something to anchor me now. I knelt, wincing at the stiffness in my knees, and opened the lid. The scent hit me first. Cedar and something older. Paper, maybe, or time. Inside, letters bundled in twine. Receipts from the first hardware store we ever visited. A photograph of us on our wedding day. Not the posed one, but the candid Derek's brother had snapped of us laughing in the church kitchen, elbow deep in cake. And near the bottom, a notebook. Soft leather cover, worn at the corners. I didn't recognize it. I opened it carefully. It was his handwriting. Slanted, deliberate. Dated at the top. September 1996. The first line made my throat tighten. For Margaret, if I'm not around when you need to read this. I sat down right there on the attic floor, my back against an old suitcase, and read every page. It wasn't a diary. Not exactly. More like pieces of thought, observations, love letters dressed up as ordinary reflections. He wrote about the day Garrison started college, how proud he was, how worried, how he saw the shift beginning, the distance. He wrote about the business loan we co-signed for him in 2004, how it felt like the beginning of being taken for granted. He wrote about me. She gives more than she should. Always has. But if anyone thinks she's weak, they've never seen her dig a trench in July or fight a bank manager over a 0.2% interest discrepancy. She's got steel in her spine. She just forgets sometimes. The tears came slowly, not like a storm, like a quiet river moving through me. Page after page, he saw it all. The love, the sacrifice, the slow erosion. They'll try to make her small, he wrote once. Not out of cruelty, but because they don't know how to carry the weight of all she's built. I hope she remembers it's hers. I hope she doesn't let them take it. I closed the book gently, like it was alive. He knew. Even then, he knew. And now, I knew too. I placed the notebook back in the trunk, tied the lid shut, and stood slowly. The attic didn't feel like a grave anymore. It felt like a cathedral. A quiet place where something holy had been whispered and heard. Back in the kitchen, I placed the photo from our wedding day on the windowsill. Not the framed one, the real one, slightly faded, crooked at the edge. Us, laughing over spilled frosting and bad music. Home wasn't just a place. It was this moment, this knowing, and I wasn't giving it up. Not now, not ever. What? The house was silent, but not the kind of silence I used to dread. It was the quiet of choice, of knowing no one was coming and feeling strangely fine with it. It was Sunday, the traditional family day, if you believe in tradition. Derek and I used to host dinners like clockwork. Roasts in winter, grilled vegetables in summer. Garrison and Lila would show up with mismatched Tupperware and wine neither of them paid for. The kids would run wild through the yard, and I'd pretend not to care when they trampled the begonias. That was before. Now, Sunday was just another day. I woke early, made my tea, and stood at the window watching a neighbor's dog chase its tail in the yard next door. The air had that late autumn crispness, the kind that made the leaves smell warm and the floorboards feel a little cooler underfoot. I didn't expect anyone to visit. They hadn't in weeks. Not since Garrison's last performance in the dining room. Not since I'd told them no. But this Sunday, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt still. I did the laundry. Hung the sweaters just right. Wiped the baseboards. There was something deeply satisfying about touching each part of the house, claiming it, not for show, not for potential buyers, but for me. In the afternoon, I sat in the sunroom with my mending basket, sewing a button onto Derek's favorite flannel, the one I still wore on the coldest nights. The radio played quietly in the background, one of those old stations that hadn't caught up with the times. I liked that. I liked being somewhere, even mentally, that wasn't trying to be trendy. I got a text around 3, from Teresa. Just one line. We'll need to discuss your financial plan soon. There are things that concern us. I stared at it for a long while. No greeting, no question, no warmth, just assumption. I didn't respond. Instead, I deleted it. That night, I made myself a proper meal. Roasted carrots and potatoes, a piece of fish I seasoned the way Derek used to. I set the table for one, lit a candle. Not for drama, for peace, for intention. As I ate, I thought about what had shifted. Not much on the outside. They were still themselves. Garrison, still distant. Teresa, still sharp-edged and calculated, but I wasn't the same. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't watching the driveway or checking the porch for footsteps. I was simply here, present, in my home, uninvited by anyone else but fully welcome by myself. When I finished dinner, I washed the dishes slowly. No rush, no pressure, just the sound of water and ceramic. That night, I didn't check the door twice. I didn't peer out the curtains. I didn't rehearse any conversations in my head. I put on Derek's flannel, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed with the kind of quiet that only comes when you've stopped apologizing for your own existence. The wind picked up outside. The house creaked the way it always had. I whispered into the dark, just before sleep took me. "You're safe with me." And I meant it. To the house. To myself. To all of it. It was raining the morning I wrote the letter. Not a dramatic storm, just a gentle, steady tapping on the windows. The kind of rain that makes you feel like time has slowed down on purpose. I made a pot of tea, sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the good stationery. The thick kind, cream-colored, with the faint floral border I'd been saving for a better occasion. Apparently, this was it. I didn't write it out of anger. I'd had my fill of that. Anger was loud, messy. What I felt now was quieter, sharper, more precise. I opened the folder with the documents from Mr. Kaufman, the trust paperwork, the revised will, the bank authorizations. I laid them out like pieces of a map, each one pointing to a future that no longer involved tiptoeing around my own child's entitlement. The letter was short. To Garrison Elwood, "This is to inform you that as of this date, I have formally revoked all financial access and authorizations previously granted to you in connection with my accounts, property, or estate. There will be no further discussion. Please do not contact me regarding my financial decisions. They are no longer your concern. Margaret Elwood." I signed it in full. Not mom, not mother, not love, always. Just my name. I folded it neatly and placed it in an envelope, along with copies of the revocation forms I'd already submitted to the bank and the lawyer. Then I wrote his address on the front. In my own handwriting, the same script I used when I signed his permission slips and wrote his lunch notes and addressed his wedding cards. I didn't drive to the post office. I walked. In the rain. Without an umbrella. It wasn't symbolic. I just didn't feel like fussing. The rain felt honest. The clerk at the post counter was a young woman, maybe 20. She took the envelope, weighed it, and asked if I wanted tracking. "Yes," I said. "I want to know when it lands." She gave me a receipt. I folded it into my coat pocket like a quiet promise. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery and bought a lemon tart. Just one. Just for me. I ate it slowly at the kitchen table while the envelope made its way to wherever Garrison was. Probably in his office, probably planning something, probably confident that time and guilt and habit would bring me back into line. But he didn't know I'd already stepped out of it. Later that evening, the phone rang. I didn't answer. Then a message came through. "Mom, I got your letter. This is ridiculous. We need to talk." I read it twice, then deleted it. Another message followed. "I'm coming by this weekend. We're not done with this conversation." I set the phone face down on the table, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed. Not loudly, not bitterly, just one soft laugh, like the sound of a lock finally clicking shut. We were done with this conversation. He just didn't know it yet. He didn't come that weekend. The threats always sounded more urgent than they ever were. That's something I'd learned over the years. Garrison liked to loom more than he liked to act. He'd puff himself up with certainty, then let the air out slowly, hoping I wouldn't notice the silence that followed. Instead, someone else came. A knock at the door. 3 quick raps, like someone unsure whether to interrupt. I opened it, expecting a delivery. Maybe Ruth. But it was neither. It was Harold Whitman. I hadn't seen him in over 2 decades. Last time was at Derek's retirement picnic. He'd been a soft-spoken man then, with kind eyes and a gentle way of folding his hands when he listened. Derek always liked him. Said he was one of the rare good ones from the old days at the paper mill. "Margaret," he said, pulling off his cap. "I hope this isn't out of turn." He looked older. Of course he did. Thinner hair, slower posture. But something about his voice hadn't changed. Still deliberate, still warm. "I was driving through town," he continued. "Stopped by Ruth's, and she said you might appreciate a visit." I let him in. We sat in the living room, the good chairs, the ones no one used anymore. I made us tea without asking. He took it with honey. Always had. For a while, we talked about nothing. Weather, the old mill, who had passed, who hadn't, how hard it was to keep a garden in this kind of clay. He asked about Derek, gently. I told him what needed telling. The illness, the end, the quietness of the house afterward. Then he looked around the room. "This place still feels like you," he said. I paused. "People keep trying to convince me it shouldn't." "I heard," he said quietly. "Ruth's got a sharp ear." I smiled. "That she does." He sipped his tea, then leaned forward slightly. "You know, after my wife passed, my son tried the same thing. Wanted to put me in a place with more support. Said it'd be easier, safer, cleaner." "And did you go?" He laughed. "I let him take me to see it. Nice enough. Quiet. White walls. Empty hallways. I stood there for 10 minutes and realized if I stayed, I'd vanish." I nodded. "It's a strange thing," I said. Spending your whole life building something just to have your own blood try to sweep it away. Not always out of cruelty, he said. No, but out of convenience, yes. We sat a while longer. The tea cooled. The rain from the day before had left the windows streaked, but the sunlight was pushing through now, warming the floor. "I'm glad you came," I said honestly. He stood to leave, but hesitated near the door. "You're not crazy," he said, turning to me. For saying no." I looked at him. "You don't think I'm being petty?" "No," he said. "I think you're drawing a line, and people don't like lines when they're used to crossing them." I walked him to the porch. He stepped off slowly, tugging his coat around him. "I might stop by again," he said. "You might be welcome," I replied. He smiled, and the years between us seemed smaller somehow. After he left, I stood on the porch for a while, watching the street. Leaves swirled along the curb. The wind had picked up again, but I felt steady. Not because of Harold, not because of Ruth, but because the more I reclaimed, the more I remembered something vital. I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. I already had everything I needed, including my name on the deed. He showed up on a Thursday. No call, no warning. Just the crunch of tires on gravel and the low hum of his car engine settling like dust outside my window. I was folding laundry. Towels, mostly. Derek used to tease me for folding them too precisely, like I was preparing for inspection. I kept folding. The knock was firm, not angry, not polite. Just a man used to being heard. I opened the door and didn't step aside. "Mom," he said, adjusting his coat. "We need to talk." I didn't answer, just turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open wide enough for him to make a choice. He followed. In the kitchen, I placed the folded towels in a basket. He stood awkwardly by the table, like a guest unsure of his welcome, which, I suppose, he was. "I got the paperwork," he started. "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he picked up in high school when he lied about his report cards. "Look, I know you're upset, but what you're doing, it's permanent." "Yes," I said. "You're cutting me out. I'm setting boundaries." He shook his head. "You don't need boundaries. You need help. Support. Someone to look out for you." "Then why haven't you asked how I've been? Not once. Since the funeral." He opened his mouth, closed it, searched the floor for answers that weren't there. "This isn't about spite, Garrison," I continued. "It's about clarity. About finally understanding that what you call help has always come with strings. Strings that wrapped tighter every year until I couldn't move without checking if you'd approve. I never asked for control. No, you just expected it." He blinked. "You're my mother. Yes, I was. I fed you, clothed you, protected you. I gave when I didn't have. I gave because that's what mothers do. But you mistook that giving for owing. And now, you're angry that I stopped." He stepped back slightly, as if the words carried weight. "You're angry," he said quietly. "You've never spoken to me like this before." "I've never needed to," I replied, "because I kept thinking you'd remember who raised you. But I see now you only remember what you were given, not what it cost." He looked around the room, the walls, the stove, the chipped counter. Familiar terrain. But it didn't belong to him anymore, if it ever did. "I just thought," he paused, "you'd want us to be part of the plan." "You are," I said, "just not in the way you expected." "What does that mean?" "It means this house will stay in the family, but not with you." His jaw tightened. "Rebecca," I said simply. "She's kind. She listens. She called on my birthday." He didn't speak. "She won't sell it," I added. "She understands what it is." Garrison's face hardened. "You're letting her manipulate you." I laughed once, low, steady. "No, son, that's what you've been doing. And I've finally stopped letting you." He stared at me for a long time, then nodded, slow and bitter. "So that's it. That's it." He turned toward the door. At the threshold, he hesitated. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "But you might." He left without another word. I closed the door behind him, locked it. Not out of fear, out of finality. There would be no more discussions, no more negotiations. This was mine. The home, the peace, the right to decide. And the silence that followed? It didn't ache anymore. It settled like a blanket. Warm, earned, and mine. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, with a faint floral border, just like the paper I used for the revocation letter. But this one felt different in my hands. I'd written it a dozen times in my head, at the kitchen table, on walks to the post office, in the quiet just before sleep. But now, sitting by the window as the light softened over the yard, I wrote the final version. I began simply, "Rebecca, my girl." I suppose you knew this letter was coming, even before I mentioned it. You've always seen me clearer than the rest of them, and I've seen that in you since the day you held my hand at Grandpa's funeral and didn't let go until I told you I was all right, even though I wasn't. You're the reason I could see the truth. I raised your father, yes, and I loved him. But somewhere along the way, love started looking like a debt, like silence, like a house turned into a transaction. You reminded me it didn't have to be. So here's what you need to know. This house, with its chipped counters and stubborn floors, its creaky stairs and loud pipes, it's yours. Not because I want to burden you, but because I trust you to hold it with care. It's not just wood and roof and value. It's roots. Your roots. It's stories. It's that swing in the backyard where you used to sing when you thought no one could hear. It's Grandpa's garden bed. It's the kitchen drawer that sticks. It's the place where your grandmother remembered who she was. When the time comes, this house will be in your name. It cannot be sold without your signature. No one else, not your father, not Teresa, not any lawyer they find, will have the right. Do with it what you will when you're ready. Live in it. Restore it. Sit on the porch with strong tea and stronger opinions, or pass it on to someone who will love it the way it's meant to be loved. That part will be yours to decide, but never let anyone tell you that your care is weakness, that your softness is naive. You saw me when no one else did, and that sight saved me. I'm proud of you, and if I'm not around when this letter finds you, just know that my name is on every wall, not in ink, but in memory, and yours will be too. With all the fierce love in my bones, Grandma, I folded it carefully, sealed it, and placed it in the drawer where I kept the good scissors and the recipes I didn't need to read anymore. Next to it, I placed the deed transfer document, already signed. Mr. Kaufman would file the rest. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. That night, I lit one candle. No reason, just because. I ate dinner by the window. I watched the porch light flicker, then hold steady. I ran my fingers over the table Derek built with calloused hands and too many splinters, and I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remembered myself. If you've read this far, you understand why stories like this matter. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or pass it on to someone who needs to remember their voice. We don't always get the ending we wanted, but we can still choose our own.